What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the show. So I want to talk a little bit about dividend checks, stimulus checks going out to the American people. Whatever happened to that? So we've heard dividend checks. We've heard something new that President Trump is talking now about, tariff rebates. So stimulus checks going out, and they'll use the tariff revenue that's coming in to pay out stimulus checks. But before the president started talking about these tariff rebates, he was talking about dividend checks coming from Doge. You remember Doge, right? This organization that was put together by President Trump to weed out waste, fraud, and abuse. You heard that. And that was the talking point for the first several months. Waste, fraud, and abuse. Doge is going after waste, fraud, and abuse. They're going to be able to save the American people trillions of dollars. And in the beginning, you remember Elon Musk was saying that they'd be able to save $2 trillion. And then that was revised down to $1 trillion. And then that was revised again to $150 billion. And to this day, we still don't know how much Doge was able to save because there's no transparency. They're putting out information, but they're not showing us how they're making all these cuts. And so I've heard that it's $150 billion to $200 billion that they've been able to save. This is coming from Doge. But then when you look at the numbers, it's less than $10 billion. And so what Doge was supposed to do with the savings is they were going to send out these dividend checks. Now, these dividend checks, they were talking about $5,000 going out to every household, every tax-paying household. That is what they were saying initially. Now, we don't hear anything else about it. And Reuters just put out an article talking about Doge. Is Doge completely disbanded? Are they still in action? Are they still doing anything? And the White House pushed back and said, no, Doge is still around. But we don't have any evidence of that. We don't see any evidence of that. If they're still around, what are they doing and how much money are they saving? How much money did they save from waste, fraud, and abuse? That's what we all wanted to know. And I was saying this even back when they just started doing this and they were saying, yes, we're going after waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, be transparent. Show us where this waste, fraud, and abuse is and how much money are you really saving. You remember when Elon Musk was out there talking about Social Security and you have people 150 years old receiving Social Security checks. Was that ever true? And how much money did this 150-year-old person receive in Social Security benefits? That was never said. All it was saying is that, yes, you had people that were on the record and they could be 150 years old. But when the press looked into this whole being 150 years old, they realized that it was a system, the system that they were using, COBOL or whatever the system was, and that program will default to that age if you have something incorrect in your birth date. And so now here we are. We're talking about dividend checks again because it looks like those aren't coming, because if you don't have Doge anymore, or if Doge is not really doing anything anymore, then there's no money that's going to be able to go out to the American people. They're done with it. And we don't even know how much money that is. We still don't know what the final numbers look like. And we should know. And that was one of the arguments that a lot of people had in the past. You have this outside organization coming in, getting all this documentation from the American people, and then they don't have to be transparent in what they found. And so now we don't know how much money they were able to save. We don't know how much money they could send out to the American people in these dividend checks. And so now it's just a big mess. It's a big mess. You had a lot of people that were laid off and some people had to be hired back. I'd be willing to bet that Doge cost us more money than what was saved. That's what I'm thinking. And that's why we're not hearing much about it anymore. Because they looked at it and paying all the employees, the organization from Doge and all that, they ended up paying more money than they saved. And so it didn't make any sense. And then a lot of people that were laid off, they had to rehire, or they had to hire someone else, or they had to retrain people or train people that are brand new. And so I think that's what really happened with Doge. But let's talk a little bit about this, because we have another stimulus check that President Trump is talking about. Even back when they were talking about this dividend stimulus check, I told you guys, look, Congress doesn't have an appetite for it. They've already said that they don't want to move forward with this. And so you just have the president out there saying stuff. And this initiated on Twitter. You had a CEO, I can't remember the CEO, but you had someone out there saying, hey, I think it'd be a good idea if we had these dividend checks and some of the money that we're saving with this waste, fraud, and abuse from Doge, we could send it out to the American people. And then Elon Musk got on there and said, hey, that sounds like a good idea. I'll run it by the president. He ran it by the president, and the president said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. And that was it. We heard nothing else after that. But what we did hear is we heard Speaker Johnson saying, no, I don't think we should do that. I think we should take that money and pay down our national debt. And Speaker Johnson is actually saying the same thing right now. So I think we can all agree dividend checks, the Doge dividend checks, that's gone. That's not going to happen. But the new stimulus checks that they're talking about now, the tariff revenue money, what are we going to see there? The reality is it's the same situation, if not even worse. Because in this situation, you're talking about tariff revenue, which, let's face it, tariff revenue, this is coming from the American people. So we're paying for it. Either the company, when that product comes to the U.S., that company in the U.S. has to pay that tariff, and then they pass that cost on to the consumer. And so realistically, that money is coming from us anyway. But when it comes to these whole stimulus checks from tariffs, we don't know if that tariff money is going to, if they could use that tariff money, because the Supreme Court has already listened to this case, and they could rule in the coming months and say this tariff revenue needs to go back. And if they say this tariff revenue needs to go back, they can't send out stimulus checks, because if they send out stimulus checks, let's just say it's $400 billion that they need to send. First off, $300 billion is what the White House is saying they'd be able to bring in when it comes to this tariff revenue. Right now, I think they're around $200 billion, so they're not even at $300 billion yet. But to send out these stimulus checks that they're talking about, it would cost about $400 billion or more, which means the federal government would need to borrow money in order to send out these stimulus checks. And so the fact that the president is out there saying that we can send out these stimulus checks in the amount of $2,000, that's going to cost $400 billion, and we don't even have that money, and the tariff money right now is on hold because the Supreme Court can come back and say you're going to have to pay that back. And if they do have to pay it back, if the federal government has to pay it back to all these companies, well then you're going to have to borrow $400 billion to pay out these stimulus checks. And so this is a big mess. Okay, and then another thing, when it comes to, and I don't know how the Supreme Court is going to rule on this, and I don't even know how they're going to go about this, because if you think about it, yes, you have companies that are paying these tariffs when they come in to, product comes into the U.S., they have to pay that tariff to the federal government, and then they pass that cost on to the consumer. Now, not all companies are passing the cost on to the consumer. They might be passing some of it, maybe 50%, but not all of it. Or some companies might just be eating it. They're not passing it on at all. But most companies will pass at least some of it to the consumer because the price has gone up. And because the price has gone up, they want their profit margins to stay the same. And so that's why they're doing that. But if the Supreme Court rules that you have to pay that money back, where does the money go? It goes to that company that bought that product and had to pay that tariff. What about the consumer? What about all of us who had to go to the store and spend extra because of the tariff? We don't get anything in return, but that company, they will get their money back in essence. And so that's going to be a huge problem. So we'll have to see how the Supreme Court handles that. But one thing that we know that the president is saying one thing. We know that Congress doesn't have an appetite for any type of stimulus for the American people. They're saying all this money, tariff revenue that's coming in, the Doge, the money they found in waste, fraud, and abuse, all that should be going to pay down our national debt. That is what they're saying. And right now, Republicans are controlling the House and the Senate. And so they're the only ones right now that have the control to move legislation like that. And so we'll have to see if we do see a stimulus check. But I'm telling you right now, and we already heard the president say this, one more thing too. The president said it wouldn't happen, this stimulus check that we're talking about now, it's not going to happen until 2026. Now, I don't know why the president would say, well, it's not going to happen until 2026. Maybe the president is waiting until the Supreme Court rules, and after the Supreme Court rules on this whole tariff issue, if they rule that the money has to go back, well, then I would think that President Trump would probably blame the Supreme Court and say the Supreme Court is the reason why you're not going to get these stimulus checks. That could be a strategy, okay? Not a good one, but that could be a strategy because you've already put it out there. And so I want to know what you guys think about this. Did you believe these Doge dividend checks were ever going to go out? Do you believe now that these stimulus checks that President Trump's talking about, these tariff rebates, do you think they're going to go out? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe for more. And remember, stay informed and stay engaged. And I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye. So that's all we have for this video. Make sure if you guys want to send me an email, you can do that, david@thetecshow.com. Like the video, subscribe for more, and check out these videos over here for some more great content. Talk to you later. Bye.